Nearly half of the American population feel lonely or a sense of loss over the holidays. 36 to 40% of them don't even celebrate the holidays because of the grief they're experiencing. Now, grief comes in many forms, and it's caused by many different things. It's not always the death of a loved one that causes grief. Today, I have a very special guest on my show. Dr. Richelle is a clinical psychologist, and we are going to take a dive into the conversation about grief. Stick around to the very end, where she's going to give some practical tips on what you can do to head off your grief over the holidays and truly anytime. Do you fear what lies beyond retirement? What if it's a gateway to a life filled with purpose, meaning, and adventure rather than an end? Discover peace and fulfillment as you boldly enter this new chapter in Courageous Retirement, a Christian podcast. I'm your host, author, and coach, Vona Johnson. Let's get started. Hey, Richelle, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I think releasing this right before the holidays is no coincidence. I think that this is a message that I believe a lot of people need to hear. We are going to talk about grief. And we've been chit-chatting here before I hit record. And something you said is where I really want to start with this, because I feel like we should define grief. It's different for everybody, but I love how you described grief. And I want to start there. We'll come back and fill in some of the gaps about who you are and what you do, but let's start there.
Yeah, grief is the reaction to a loss of any kind.
Yes.
And it involves so many emotions, sometimes very conflicting emotions at the same time. And that happens because we have familiar patterns in our lives. We get used to things being a certain way. And then when they come to an end or something stops them, sometimes abruptly, sometimes gradually, sometimes we've even welcomed them and we chose them.
Yes.
There comes a point when we're in that place of, oh, things have changed. And I don't feel like this is a world that I understand. My life feels out of sorts. And depending on what the ending is, if it's person, death, or a relationship like through divorce or breaking up, because any ending of a relationship can bring about a feeling of grief, or maybe it could be, I know you're in the whole retirement realm. um, Grief happens in retirement because things change. There's an abrupt change in our day-to-day routines, and our identity is so often
Yes.
tied to what we do, and what we get acknowledged for, and what we get paid for.
Yes.
And an ending, and when you've been a mother or parent for years, and now your kids are in their own lives, creating their own traditions, and that can bring about a feeling of grief. Having a diagnosis,
Yep.
any kind, where your body is no longer cooperating and doing what you want it to do in the way it used to do it. Aging
Yep.
can bring about grieving.
That another one that you haven't touched on that I think is really huge in our society, and I don't really want to dive too deep on this because it could be a whole separate conversation. But there is a lot of grieving of families who have walked away from relationships, parents whose children don't speak to them anymore. And that is just to me so devastating that our world has become so bifurcated that we can't even just talk it through. Because even with like death, I mean, there was a finite end, and you can deal with that, but that not knowing where they are, if they'll ever be there again, it's kind of like I've always thought having a child kidnapped or something like that would be so much worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Grief is huge. And I loved how you said that it's the broken heart.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think so often in life we look at things from a problem perspective. So if I have a problem, then the way to approach a problem is to fix it. And we come at that from a cognitive or a mental perspective is I got to figure this out. I don't know why I'm doing this way. What's wrong with me? I need to do this differently. The
Yes.
reality is grieving isn't a broken mind. It's a broken heart. And what a broken heart needs is space to heal. It has a need to be witnessed and to just acknowledge where you are, that you're hurting.
Mm.
No bypassing that pain, although we have lots of things we love to do to distract ourselves from that pain. In fact, there is an actual term we call that, and it's called STERBs, STERBs, STERB, short term energy relieving behaviors.
Ah.
So we have our favorites, right? Amazon, Amazon, Netflix. Oh my gosh, this is the time of year where we love food. I mean, when don't we love food? But
Mm.
eating,
Yeah.
drink. You can go down the list of some of the, some are funny and some are actually downright scary and tragic addictions of, using alcohol, drugs,
Shopping.
shopping. Yeah, it's known as yes. So yeah, it's all the things we do. So think back when we were kids, and I don't know if this ever happened to you, but there's a classic story of a little girl who, um, she was at on the playground at school, and the girls they rejected her, and so they wouldn't let her play with her. So she was devastated. And when she got home, she's talking to her mom and she's crying and she said, "Yeah, they wouldn't let me play at recess." And her mom says, "Oh, dear, dear," kind of pats her on the head and says, "I just made up a plate of cookies. Here, have a cookie. That'll make you feel better."
Right.
And so, and again, well-meaning, that's not to, dump on mom, but she's doing what many of us have learned to do when you're feeling bad is do something to feel better quick. And so what we do is that in a moment, sure, a fresh baked cookie does taste and feel good. Comfort food feels good. Looking at Amazon to see what I want to put into my shopping cart feels good. But when it becomes a substitute for feeling what we feel,
Mm.
now what's happening is what we're pushing down emotions that need to be addressed and they need to be experienced and they need to be expressed in healthy ways. Because what people believe is that if I just ignore it, it'll go away. But unfortunately, the pain of any grief, your body stores it and it will come out. And oftentimes, what people find, it comes out in the least opportune times. So, where we kind of lose it. What do you think road rage is? I mean, more than likely, the person who's having road rage, that's just the tip off, but there's something brewing underneath. And that oftentimes is what we're finding the culture of people who don't know how to grieve, don't know what's healthy to do about their feelings attached to a loss.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. You know, you sent me a short bio, and normally on the show, I don't do a lot of biography stuff
Yeah.
because we're just having conversations. But I think it's important in this conversation for people to know that this just isn't a couple of girlfriends sitting around talking about something that we care about. So, would you just spend a little bit of time talking about your qualifications to be able to talk about this? I think that's really important at this point.
Be happy to. So there's the professional and the personal side to this. So professionally, I've been a clinical psychologist since 1990. Dates me quite a
You know, the retirement show, we're all in the same boat here.
go. And my career has taken me on many pathways, but where I've most recently landed is that I morphed into what I call as an abundant life
Mm.
coach. And it's all about meeting people in their points of transition, navigating a crossroads of sorts. And it could be in any of the things like I mentioned before. losses of all kinds, or maybe just opportunities. But who am I now and what am I here for? And what's next? And what does God have for me? And who am I here to be? All of those things. So that's what I've been doing for the last almost 9 years now, is helping people navigate and to find out who they are. I mean, it's really identity based so that they can live the abundant life God calls them to. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I was transitioning into doing more grief work. And interestingly enough, grief has always been an area of passion, if that makes sense. It sounds a little strange to say that, but if I could just share a little personal stuff. So when I was 9 years old, my oldest sister, who I adored, she was like a second mom to me. She died very suddenly. She contracted spinal meningitis. She had gone into a coma, and my parents had to make a decision that was horrendous, which was to remove her from life support. And she actually died on Valentine's Day, and when I was a fourth grader, and it was probably one of the hardest things I had ever experienced. Of course, at 9, you don't really experience a lot of that stuff by that point. And it was a handful of years later that my next oldest sister, her husband took his own life. He had been, now we can say looking back, because I was a teenager at that point, teen, loved him. He was the brother I never had. But he had PTSD at a time when they weren't talking about that in the 70s, and he had clinical depression. But both of those early losses really shaped who I became. And I was old before my years. And so clinical psychology was a pathway that opened up. My dad was a social worker. He and I would go on these walks, and he would say, you just get life for a teenager. I don't understand how you know this stuff, but when when you survive some of the most devastating events of life, you realize how tenuous it is. At least I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took it very seriously, but my goal became to try to prevent anyone else from experiencing an untimely death of suicide, which is why I chose the path of clinical psychology. Um, so anyway, that was part of my story, but grief has been in and out of my life throughout my years, and just like anybody else, right? There's more than 40 types of losses that a human can experience in their lives, and that would bring about grief. And so I have a cancer story in there. When I was 40s, I had breast cancer. Um, I lost a sister right after I retired from my position, just before I started my coaching business. She died of cancer. And then in 2021, when COVID seemed to be on the, finally getting better, both of my parents contracted it at the same time. My mom died in the ICU, my dad 3 weeks later. He had recovered actually from COVID, but I say he died of a broken heart. We had just celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, just months before they got sick. And it was ironically at that time, when before I knew I was gonna be facing a huge, huge loss of my parents, that I would found myself in a grief educator program.
Yeah.
I knew that in this coaching realm, I was encountering so many people that what was holding them back from living abundantly was loss. And I realized, and I think a lot of it's because of my clinical background and just how God has used and wired me, um, that I knew that part of helping people to move forward in their lives was to help unhook them from the past through grief. That was what was holding them back. And so after I lost my parents, it was about a year later, I went through this something called the grief recovery method. I encountered it and experienced it for myself to heal. It was devastating, honestly, to lose both of my parents. I was so very close to them. And it was so unexpected. It happened so quickly. But this grief recovery method was phenomenal. And I went into the training to become a specialist. And since then, it's been my passion and heart to help people get unstuck
Mm.
from unaddressed grief, whether it's recent or it's long ago. And so much of my work now is in the grief recovery realm. And I call it abundant emotional freedom because if we don't heal from the grief of our losses, it becomes an emotional burden. And
Mm.
so to get free of that, boy, that's where we can then rebuild our lives. And that's what my goal is, to help people.
So, one of the questions that I have is, I mean, there's this perception out there that, if we have a loss, let's spend a couple of weeks, dwell on it, cry your tears, and move on. And we know that
For it.
yeah, come on, get back to life. Let's do this. And that's not how it works. And everybody's path is different. But what are some of the symptoms? Whether it's we would be evaluating ourselves that we realize, oh man, that's why I feel the way I do. Or if it's a loved one that we're seeing, what are some of the symptoms we should be watching for that may want to have us start having some of these conversations or look more into it?
Well, I don't know if I would call them symptoms as much as just where people, they just lack joy. It's like a spark has gone out of life.
Yeah.
And it can show up in so many ways, but oftentimes people will say, I don't know why, but I just can't seem to find a path. I can't figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. It can show up in so many ways, in relationship issues, in confidence problems, just feeling, well, I keep using the word stuck because that's what I hear so many people say. I just feel so stuck. I just don't know how to get my joy. We may not say, how do I get my joy back? Because some people haven't never really experienced joy, depending on if they have a lot of losses that go back to childhood.
Well, and I feel like from a Christian standpoint, I want to sit on that for a minute because I had a conversation with a woman, and it's been years ago now, and we were doing a Bible study together, and she made the comment that, people keep telling me that, I just need to get my joy back, and she was like, I just can't. And I said, well, I want to beg to differ. I said, you may not be walking around smiling and singing songs all day long, but you're living your life and you're trusting Jesus, and joy is different than happiness, right? I mean, we can find hope in that knowledge that we will be with that individual again. And I mean, so is it layers of joy, or am I just flat wrong?
Oh no, I don't think you're wrong. However, I've been learning more about, what is the difference between happiness and joy? Because I think we have kind of, as believers, have said, well, I don't have to be happy because that's based on circumstances and joy is based on the joy of the Lord, right? And yet I think both are important because what I've been learning through some of my study is that happiness is God's idea.
Mm,
And if happiness is his idea, then it's important. And yes, we can have joy, but when we're not happy, it tends to take the color out of life.
oh, yeah.
And grief does that. And so if someone says that I don't have joy, I would want to just press in a little bit and say, when you had joy, what was different? If they've had it before, they've been able to identify, because that's always a clear sign to say, well, what happened to your joy? When did when did it disappear? What
Mm,
was there, a pivotal moment, or did it just gradually seem to get grayer? Because I think of joy as vibrant and colorful.
okay.
So I can tell you this though, Vana, that 100% of us are grievers.
Yeah.
We may not be in an active, acute phase of grieving, but 100% of us have experienced losses of various kinds. And it goes all the way back to your childhood. And I want you to think about it this way. kind of like when we were born, we were given a backpack. As we go through life as a child, all the way up until we turn adults, different things happen along the way that represent the ending of something. So for a little kid, it might be, we move to a different house and I have different friends. That could be the first grief somebody encounters. And if it isn't addressed, if it isn't worked through, if the emotions aren't processed on some level, they get converted to either a rock, a pebble, or a boulder, depending upon the intensity of that loss. And it gets thrown in the back. And then you go through life, and for some people, they have traumas. They have true abuse, true terrible things that happen that maybe don't get addressed, and those turn into rocks and they get thrown into your backpack. Or, the things that will say, well, yeah, of course, you're going to have friends who will bully you. I mean, that's normal. All kids have get bullied. But you know what? Every one of those experiences where our hearts are broken, if it doesn't get addressed and healed, it gets converted to a rock. And so what ends up happening is by the time we get to adulthood, some of us, our backpacks are busting open at the seams.
Mhm.
And then we go into adulthood and we experience all the stuff. Maybe you get into the college of choice or you don't, and you fail out, or your boyfriend breaks up with you, or you get pregnant and you didn't plan on it. And, just think about all the things, the life choices. And if they don't get healed at the time, we just toss them in the backpack until we get to a point where it's like the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. And that backpack now takes you under. And now it's time to empty out the back, see what's in there.
Mhm.
Often what I have found with people, joy, joy was crushed along the way.
All those rocks.
And,
Beautiful.
and it could be a recent loss, so a gal that I've worked with who lost a child in a car accident. She was a very strong believer, very strong believer. The loss of her child, though, led to a crisis of faith and loss of trust in a God that she believed in.
Mhm.
And for her to move through this grieving, she's had to name all of the losses along the way and to be able to see it wasn't just the loss of her child, where there were many losses before
Mhm.
that she had ignored. And so as we've emptied out the backpack, she's grieving one by one and getting lighter and finding purpose. Her joy isn't fully back, but what I will say is this, is she's finding a little bit of hope. It's kind of like the light turns on, it's just a candle in the dark. It's a very
Mhm.
dark room and it's all you need. It's a little bit of candle, but walking through the grieving process with the right tools helps people to find their way back. What is purposeful for them? And it may be very different. It may be very different. We're in the holidays right now.
Mhm.
You and I were just talking about recent losses since last Christmas, and the holidays look and feel different. And we can't do things the way we once did. And we can't expect ourselves to feel the way we once felt
Yep.
going the holidays. And it's okay. Okay to be where we are.
So what are some things, if there's somebody that's listening to this right now and they're really dreading the holidays, maybe they haven't put a tree out, maybe they, um, aren't making any plans to be with anyone because they just can't bear to even think about having a conversation, which actually do it. What are some things that they could do to just help? It's not going to fix it, but maybe just make it a little lighter.
Well, I think just recognizing that it's different and it's okay to be where you are.
Mhm.
And that in and of itself is a healing balm you can apply to yourself, is that I get to do this the way where I'm at. I mean, to just be where I am. Where I am today might be that I can't put up a tree this year.
Yep.
I'm not going to send out a holiday card. I'm not going to bake this year. I'm not going to host. I may or may not come to your home this year. And so what I recommend to people as they're facing holidays, because let's face it, holidays in and of themselves are stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us. And
Even at the most joyful times.
I love Christmas, but it can be hard. It's stressful. And grieving is stressful.
Yeah.
So you combine the two of those together. What do we need to do when we're in a place of major stress is we need to give ourselves space to feel what we feel and to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves in those moments. So I always like to recommend to people, especially when it's around gatherings, because I think there's often the expectation. And in fact, if you're a griever, somebody might say to you, well, you're not going to be alone. You will be with us. And they're saying it because they're uncomfortable with your grieving. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can say is, thank you for being concerned about me, but this is what I'm comfortable doing this year. And have a plan A and a plan B. The plan A could be, listen, I'll make a plan to come, but I may not stay as long. I might make an appearance and I may leave after 15 minutes. I may make that plan, and plan B is I can't leave my house that day and I'm going to throw in a frozen pizza. Just having a plan B, for many people, they're able to do plan A because they know what they're going to do if plan A just doesn't feel right.
Interesting.
Give yourself that freedom to be where you are. There is no timeline for grieving. There is no one right way to do it. The right way is what you need. You need to feel your feelings. And what I know is that feelings aren't permanent. You're not always going to feel this way. So you might say, I'm not doing Christmas this year. Guess what? Holidays come around another year. A month from now, we'll be here again. It's okay to say, not this year. It's okay to say, not yet. Yet is a powerful word to say, it might be a few years. I don't know what it's going to look like. But what I do like to encourage people to think about is what is a ritual that will bring you some peace.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that you and I were chatting about, I think before we got on the call was, so people don't want to mention the name of a loved one, right? So it's like, I'm afraid I'm going to trigger your sadness if I, say his name. The reality is most of us want our loved ones to be mentioned and be remembered. And there's something beautiful when someone says that. So let me just give you an example. My closest friend's husband died very suddenly the day after Thanksgiving this year. And it's just been a whirlwind of, she's suddenly a widow. And they had plans. And, in fact, he had even purchased the stuff to make the, what is that, Chex Mix. I got these big boxes of stuff. What to do with them, She doesn't want to make it. So anyway, what I've been, as her friend walking with her this, I have really encouraged her to say, look, what do you want to do? Not what do you think you're supposed to do? You don't have to do this perfect. You don't have to do this for anyone. Let everyone do their own grief their way. But what do you need? And so this is what she did. She called up a neighbor who had already offered, is there's anything I can do to help you? Let me know. She calls up her neighbor and says, I've got 3 big boxes of Chex Mix. My husband was going to make Chex Mix. I don't want to make it. Would you be willing? I've got his recipe. Would you be willing to make it? And then just share some of it with me. You keep the rest, but share some with me. She says, I know that will mean something to my family.
That's very cool. And so as we when this show releases, I'm a little behind schedule. We talked about that too, and about the fact that it's okay to alter our plans. So Dad died in August, and this week he will be celebrating his first birthday in heaven. And I want to celebrate that. And part of this conversation is helping me do that. But what it's also doing is helping me realize that I have people in my life that need to hear this conversation. And so I'm going to challenge those of you who are listening right now to jot down some names of some people who might need to hear this conversation. And I'm going to challenge you to give yourself permission to let them do the holidays the way that they need to this year.
Could I add to that a little bit?
Of course.
This is going to sound pretty extreme, but I think give yourself permission to cancel.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission to simplify. This permission is so powerful because we are judgmental of ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves with our expectations. And just as my friend said, well, I know my kids and my brothers, and they're all expecting, and it's like, it's not your job to fix their grief. Your job is to take care of your own and to say what you have capacity for right now. Yeah. They were all ready to pull up the Christmas decorations. In fact, in between the death of her husband and the funeral, which was a week later, her brothers had said, let us bring up the Christmas decorations. And she said, no, I don't know what I want to do, but it's not happening before this funeral. So after the funeral, she asked them to bring only up her Christmas tree and decorations. And she said, I don't want any help because this is what Mike and I did together. And I want to look at every ornament and I want to cry. And I want to talk to him as I'm doing these things because this is for her the ritual that has meaning to her. And that's what I want to say about ritual is that as you're coming upon your dad's first birthday in heaven, think about, well, how do you want to honor that? For some, it's to say, let's have you gather your family and let's just have a moment of silence. Or maybe it's like, let's have a time of just remembering and say his name and what's a favorite memory. You may never have another celebration like this again or another honoring or memorial, how you want to define that for yourself. But this year gets to be what will be meaningful and compassionate for yourself.
Yeah.
Let yourself. Amen.
I love that term of just give yourself permission. It's okay to do it differently than the world expects us to do it.
Absolutely.
And isn't that, I feel like that's just a microcosm of the world today. We don't give ourselves permission to do the things we really want to do.
No. And if I could add to that permission, it's one other word, and it's trust. Trust your choices. People will say, is anyone else feeling this way? Oftentimes we're looking for validation. Am I crazy here? Because so often my friend has said several times, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm not remembering things. I don't know how to do stuff. And I said, your brain, your body, grieving. This is foreign territory. And give yourself the space. And listen, you may not be in the throes of early loss. It may have happened years ago. And here we are in the holidays, and it's all as if it just happened. That loss just happened. Let's remember that the holidays can be triggers of memories, very powerful memories. And it can become very powerful, very real, very painful again. And that's why we need to give ourselves permission to say, this is what I have capacity for this year.
Yeah.
No more, no less.
Yeah. I just really, really love that. So, if there's someone listening and they're like, wow, Dr. Richelle really hit it for me. I had no idea. I really need to talk to her. Or do you have more resources or whatever? How can they find you? I know that you have a new book out that I think sounds like a wonderful resource. So tell us about some of those things, please.
Yeah. So the first thing that I wrote was a little booklet. I had actually shared with you a
Yeah.
bunch,
And I have it over by my Bible, so I don't have it right here to hand. So
but it
yeah, there you
lists
go. It's
my journey through grief and loss, which really captures the story of my life, but more importantly, how I found hope and it's helped me to rebuild my life after loss, a
yeah.
life of purpose, which is what my mission is for other people. In that, I also introduce people to what I do, which is the grief recovery method. And it is a step by step process that literally walks people through a guided 8-week program of recovering from grief. It's not therapy, actually, call it an educational program, but it is highly therapeutic. And I've been doing this now for 2.5 years, and I have never experienced something that's so life transforming for people as what I call abundant emotional freedom. It's using the grief recovery method. So, if you or someone you know is walking through a time of loss of any kind, again, it's not just death, it's more than 40 kinds of losses. They can connect with me through my website. And it's drrichelle.com, and my name is spelled Richelle. I was supposed to be a Richard. They changed me to Richelle. So it's drrichelle.com. And on there, I have many ways to connect with me, but there's a little quiz you can take. What's blocking your abundant life? Uh, it's just a little quiz that's a good place to help you see where you are. And if you'd like to connect after that, we'll have a conversation and just see if where you are is what I can help you with. That's my greatest joy. And then the book that I just released is a full book called Abundant Soul: Daily Meditations for a Flourishing Life. And you can find that also on my website. But that is really about, again, a process that I've been learning, teaching, living is how do we care for our souls? Because I believe that the path to abundant life is caring for your soul. And as women in particular, we tend to be much better at caring for others and putting ourselves last. And Jesus really actually has flipped that on its head and says, care for your soul. Because loving your neighbor comes after you love yourself. And we source that love obviously from God and not from the world.
So I'm going to pop in here because my first podcast was called Reviving the Soul. And it was based on Psalm 19:7 through 10. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The commandments of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commandments of the Lord are clear, giving insight to life. Reverence for the Lord is pure, lasting forever. The laws of the Lord are true, each one is fair. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. I love that those verses just
Psalm 19:7 through 10.
yeah. Yeah.
Before we end, I have a little gift I'd like to share for your listeners, and it's just a short grounding exercise that I would like to offer. It takes just about a minute,
Okay.
but I really believe that this will be something they can take with them, and we can all use it as we're going into the holidays, right? So take a moment to pause. If it feels comfortable, you'll see what I do. I
Okay.
place my hand over my heart. Take a short breath in and a short breath out. Again, breathe in and out. Now quietly name what's true for you today. You don't need the right words. One feeling is enough. And ask yourself, What do I need most this holiday season? Let whatever comes up be okay. Now say this to yourself, silently or even out loud. Grief has no timeline. I'm not behind. I'm meeting this season as honestly as I can. Think of one small act of kindness you can offer yourself. Maybe resting more, saying no, leaving early, or creating a quiet moment of remembrance. Take one more slow breath. And remember, you don't have to do the holidays right. You get to do them honestly.
That is so, so beautiful. Yes. And that's a perfect way to end this conversation. My friend, it is so wonderful to reconnect with you.
Yes, I loved it. This has been a great conversation, Vona. And thank you for the work you're doing in the work.
Well, it's interesting how many parallels there really are between the work we're doing. And it's also interesting that we really got connected just before you lost your parents. And I was right there in that group as we were walking through that. So God is so good, and he just brings us people in our lives. So I think, my last word of advice is to always be looking for those people that God has brought to you, because they're there for a reason. So any last thoughts before you say goodbye?
Be good to yourself.
Hmm.
And I say that to you because you are also carrying the weight of loss, like most of us are, sister.
So anyway, thank you, my friend. This has been so lovely.
Yes, loved it.
Wasn't that just really interesting? I just want to thank Dr. Richelle for coming today. That was really helpful for me as an individual, and I pray that it is helpful for you as well. If you know someone who may be experiencing grief or just even sadness or loneliness, I encourage you to share this with them. This concludes season 2 of Courageous Retirement. Come back in 2 weeks on January 1st that we are going to kick off season 3 right here at Courageous Retirement. So have a blessed holiday season. Thank you. God bless.